Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. Welcome if this is your first time here. Welcome back if you are rejoining. My name is Marissa Price. I am a social worker, healer, educator, trauma educator, business educator, as I am growing my online business and helping other Black women grow theirs as a way to get free from a lot of these oppressive institutions that we find ourselves in. But yeah, I'm so glad that you're here. So this is going to just be like a let's chat live. I'm just going to share some information that I've been gathering about dissociation as I have been educating myself about the impacts of dissociation as someone who did experience trauma in childhood, kind of realizing how that is impacting me as an adult has been huge. And I always want to impart that even coming to that awareness that we are affected, those of us who are affected by dissociation, coming to that level of awareness is huge. And I don't think that we give ourselves enough credit for even getting to that stage, right? Because again, the structures, the society that we live in, the oppressive systems that we live in do not even allow us time often to sit with the fact that we have been traumatized, to even reflect on our childhoods, to even go back over those memories. That takes time and space. If you are worried about having your basic needs met, as is the case with a lot of us in this society, in these oppressive systems that make it so, that restrict resources, that limit our movement often, even having the time and space to come to that awareness that I was traumatized and this is how it's affecting me in adulthood, that's huge. Because that takes time and space. That takes energy to even get to that point. So I always want to make it clear that having that initial awareness is key. Because once you have that awareness, you can start to, realize these are the things that I may need to change. These are the things I may need to be aware of as I'm kind of observing myself interacting with other people. And even the way I talk to myself, right? Because self-talk is huge when it comes to dissociation. How do we regard ourselves? Hey, Jay, welcome. Welcome to everyone who's joining. Yes. So this is just an informal let's chat about dissociation. Like I said, as I am combing through my childhood and realizing how I am impacted by it in adulthood, I'm sharing what I'm learning, kind of incorporating that with my social work background and hoping to educate and make this education accessible because a lot of us unfortunately deal with these things, right? A lot of us are traumatized in childhood. We live in a traumatic society. I don't think it can be understated the impacts of colonization and enslavement that we're still grappling with, that we still have not come to terms with, that's still happening today. And that really informs our interpersonal interactions, whether it be parent, child, teacher, student, any relationship where there's a power dynamic, you're going to see these play out. So yes, dissociation. So if you are experiencing dissociation, right, you may feel disconnected from your body. I know this is huge for me. So you may even feel like you're kind of floating above your body sometimes. And this is because as a child, right, as children, we don't have the agency to leave traumatic environments. Where are we going? Right? We don't have that. So we have to stay. We have to stay in traumatic environments. And so our brains do things to protect us from the trauma that we're experiencing. And one of those things is dissociating. So it's kind of removing yourself from what you're experiencing. Your brain does this, which is a survival tactic, right? To get you through whatever it is, to get you through and preserve your sense of self. This is a way of self-preservation, right? That it's very instinctual. And the issue comes in when we're still operating in this trauma response in adulthood. Way past the time when we left the traumatic environment, we're still operating in the same pattern. And it's impacting our relationships, it's impacting the way that we view ourselves, how we view ourselves as being capable of doing things, right? One of the the things about dissociation is it impacts your self-esteem. Because when you're disconnected from the reality of who you are and the things that you contribute, how are you going to be able to really lean into, I am talented, I am gifted, these are the skills that I bring to the table? Because we're still kind of floating above ourselves, right? Even when people give us compliments on the things we do, we may not even be able to really take that in because we're so disconnected from reality, from our bodies, because we had to be in childhood, right? So this is nothing to have shame over. This is just a realization that for a lot of us who experience childhood trauma, this was a coping strategy, dissociating. And now we're seeing the impacts in adulthood. So if we have that awareness, we can make changes and we can bring, we may have to do things a little bit differently, but even being rooted in our bodies is key. Because again, one of the things with dissociation, we're detached from our bodies. Our minds have kind of floated away from our bodies as a way to preserve our sanity, right? So it's becoming rerouted in your body through things like deep breathing, grounding techniques. So I know, especially when I am flying, because flying is very scary for me. It's not my favorite thing. When I'm flying, I will kind of touch my hand right here. This is like a grounding technique. If you pinch right here, it kind of brings your awareness back to, oh, I am in my body. I am in my body. Staying rooted in that. Because a lot of times we'll go back to that same trauma response of floating away. And that's when things get a little hairy, right? Because it's like our minds can float off to all of these places. But if we're staying rooted in our body, in our breath, we're centering our breath. Hey, Lavendula. Hey, it's good to see you. Yes. If we're staying rooted in our bodies, again, in our breath, incorporating somatic practices, which is just practices to stay rooted in our bodies, right? And this is things like breath work, grounding techniques. I know there's a technique 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 5 things that you see, 4 things that you smell, 3 things that you taste, 2 things that you feel. And I always forget the last sense. But that is, yeah, yes. Lavendula, yes. I lose ground a lot. I've never seen that hand grounding technique you just did. Yeah, yeah. Grounding techniques have been so helpful for me. As I have been healing, again, coming to that awareness that I did experience traumatic events in childhood, and they are impacting me in adulthood. That awareness is huge. But yeah, the grounding technique that I use, again, is just like pinching right here, and you have a lot of nerves right here. So if you pinch right here, this always works for me. When I'm flying, when I'm really stressed, I just pinch right here, come back into my body. Yes. Yeah. So another thing with dissociation, if you used it, or this is involuntary, right? Our brains have involuntary responses when we know that we're being traumatized, when it realizes that we're being traumatized, it kind of goes into like self-preservation mode, right? Which is kind of amazing the way that it does that. But yeah, another thing of dissociation, you may feel like you're watching your life, but you're feeling nothing. So you may be disconnected from your emotions and just kind of going through the motions of everyday life if you had to do this in childhood. Again, where there was no escape. Children in this society do not have agency a lot, right? Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. I'm glad this is helpful. Yes. Yes, children in the society, right? The way that children are treated in the society is a whole other issue. Just blatantly disregarded, feelings, emotions, everything. It's like kind of pushed to the side. And we feel those impacts as adults because that is where our primary development takes place, right? How are we supposed to grapple with this in adulthood? It's really coming to that awareness that wasn't supposed to happen like that, right? My emotions were not supposed to be pushed to the side. I wasn't supposed to be in this traumatic environment with no way to escape. But now as an adult, I have agency to bring my awareness to this and operate differently in life, right? Now I have the agency to remove myself from environments that may mirror the traumatic environment that I was in childhood, which I'm actually going to talk to Dr. Kimani about on Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern, if y'all can make it, for a discussion on how childhood trauma primes us to enter toxic work environments as adults. So that's real. That's real. So you may also feel like the world is kind of foggy or abstract. I know that I experience that sometimes. You're uncertain about who you are, right? Even experiencing memory loss when it comes to childhood. Hey, Enough by MNT. Yes. Yes. Hello. Yes. Please subscribe to her channel, Enough by MNT. Wonderful artist. Yes. Yes. But yeah, you may have different internal identities, right? And there is a disorder. So if you may experience dissociation, it becomes a disorder when it starts to interfere with your everyday life. So dissociative identity disorder is real. And let me just read a little bit about that. So dissociative identity disorder, it's identity confusion and identity alteration. It may occur to varying degrees with this syndrome, with a person's personality split between one or more alternative personalities. And this will require a diagnosis by a licensed mental health professional, which I am not. But yeah, something to look into. If your behaviors, your dissociative behaviors are kind of interfering with everyday life, you may have a disorder. I cannot diagnose you with that, but that would be something you would need to see like a therapist, a licensed mental health professional for. So yes. Oh yes, I'm glad. Yes, dissociation is real. It is. It is. And like I said, as I am educating myself on the way that this shows up in my life as an adult, I'm just sharing what I learned, incorporating my education and my training in social work. And yeah, hopefully making this information more accessible, which is always my goal. Mm-hmm. Yes. So again, tips for coping with dissociation, deep breathing, anything that brings you back into your body, right? Because we had to kind of float above our bodies to cope with whatever traumatic experience that we were having. This can feel like a literal out-of-body experience. And we're still operating in that trauma response as adults often, right? So the more that we can come into our bodies, breathe deeply, ground ourselves, self-regulate, whatever that looks like for you, counting, coming back into your senses, right? Self-soothing. So this may look like having like a stress ball that you use to just realize I'm here, right? I'm in my body. I'm squeezing this. Anything that's really tangible that you can grasp onto. Because with dissociation, we kind of are in our minds all the time, right? Because that's where we had to be. Our minds were kind of taking precedence over our bodies because wherever we were physically was traumatizing us. So yes. Yes. And some of the impacts, right, when we talk about dissociation, low self-esteem, that's huge. And this kind of led me down the path of researching this for myself because I have realized no matter how many times people compliment me, it kind of hits a brick wall, right? It never really sets in like, okay, this is true what they're telling me because I know that what I'm doing, like, you know, is worthy of this compliment, even though that's like external validation, right? But it's kind of realizing that I was not able to accept compliments. And why was that? So that if you're experiencing low self-esteem, it may be dissociation. It may be rooted in childhood trauma, right? So with low self-esteem, I'm just reading an article that I linked in the description, but you'll develop the tendency to see yourself as lower than others or to please everyone if you are a people pleaser, right? Or to never feel good enough, to chronically seek validation, or to overcompensate and toxically compete and compulsively compare yourself to others. So when we are not rooted in the reality of who we are, because we had to float above ourselves, we had to disconnect from our bodies, from reality to survive, that can lead us to not even realizing how talented, how gifted we are, the contributions that we bring. And that can really lead to low self-esteem in adulthood. Because again, we are disconnected from what we're really doing. And that was a coping strategy that we used in childhood that's still showing up. Yeah. Another impact may be chronic guilt and shame. So this article says many children internalize their traumatizers' words and actions and learn to blame themselves for their pain, rationalizing it as them being bad and therefore deserving to be hurt. These now internalized feelings are one of the most common problems adults struggle with. So if you are prone to taking on guilt and shame for everything, internalizing that so deeply, maybe when you make a mistake, right? Which means you're human. That's all making a mistake means. But if you had to dissociate in childhood and disconnect from reality and what was really going on to cope, this may be something that shows up in adulthood for you, is taking on really heavy feelings of guilt and shame. Oh, thank you. Hello and welcome. Yes. Yes. And again, I linked this article in the description if y'all want to check it out. Yeah. You may also experience repressed and projected anger, right? So the article says anger is a natural and healthy response to being hurt by someone. Since children are usually forbidden from feeling anger towards their primary caregivers and other authority figures who mistreat them, they have to repress it. But the anger goes somewhere, right? It can only go inward or outward. And a lot of us, again, being socialized as girls, as women, being taught that the anger has to go internally. Because I know for me, I can speak for myself, there was no way for me to express that externally. So it went inwards. And internalized anger is dangerous, right? It kind of eats away at you. If you're not able to express that in some form, it's going to just sit there and fester, right? The more that we're able to express our emotions through things like journaling, voice noting has been so helpful for me. Creativity, expressing our emotions through creativity can be a powerful way too. But you have to get those feelings out, right? The more that we repress them, the more that we push them down, they just get bigger and they get louder. So we need healthy ways that feel good to us to express those emotions. If you are experiencing that repressed anger from having to dissociate in childhood to survive. Yeah. Okay, another way it may show up, right? Self-harm and poor self-care. So that internalized anger, again, when it has nowhere to go, it may turn into self-loathing. And it may show up in things like addiction, eating problems, poor sleep, self-attacking thoughts and destructive behaviors, poor medical care, and self-harm. So these are real consequences of what we had to do, what our brains did to protect us in childhood, which is to dissociate from our environment. We're now seeing the real consequences of this in adulthood. And it's real. Yeah, Jay says, yes, anger needs to be let out. It does. It does. Yep. Yep. And we're taught that anger is a negative emotion. Anger is but one emotion in a plethora of emotions we experience as human beings, right? And I think that us being told that we can't express anger, especially as Black women, it's dehumanizing. What do you mean that I can't be angry? This is a human emotion, and I have a right to express it, right? Even if it's just to myself. I have a right to express it. Yeah. Hey, yes, Mara. Welcome, welcome. Yes. And Mara had a fantastic panel discussion with Dr. Kimani, Glamazzini, Tisha Mitchell over the past, was that Sunday? Yeah, that was Sunday on the holiday blues. If you are experiencing the holiday blues, which is very real, that was a fantastic panel discussion, especially if you've had to go no contact with a parent who's been toxic in your life. I would definitely recommend you check that video out on Lifting as We Climb Consulting on her channel. Yes. Okay, y'all. But yes, just looking through my notes here. So again, dissociation is a coping strategy. And I'll link this article in the description too, because I'm looking at a different article. But dissociation in the setting of chronic trauma is considered to be a coping strategy, at least initially, right? So this is a way, again, that our brains protect ourselves, our psyches, from whatever trauma is happening around us that we can't escape as children. We don't have an escape hatch. So our brains go into survival mode. And so that initial protective thing that goes into place just as an instinct, we're still operating in that in adulthood. And that's impacting us far beyond, when it should have shut off. Our brains get kind of trapped in that cycle. And this is where things like therapy become essential. Having someone who is trained in this, again, a licensed mental health professional to help you turn that trauma response off, turn it down, become aware of it, become aware of how it's showing up in relationships and how you regard yourself, your talents, your abilities. If you have trouble recognizing that you even have talents and abilities, that's likely rooted in childhood trauma, right? So that's where that becomes key. Yes, Jay says they're afraid of us, thus they're afraid of our anger. Mm-hmm. Yep. Absolutely. Yep. Thank you. Ange B says, after experiencing decades of caregiver burnout, I sought therapy. So much goes back to my childhood. Everything you're saying exists in society and can be the result of generational trauma. Absolutely. Yes. And thank you for sharing that. Yes. Mm-hmm. So much goes back to childhood. Yes. Yes. And as I am healing, as I am bringing awareness to just how I operate as an adult, I've had to go back to childhood every single time. What event happened in childhood that now is causing me to dissociate as an adult, to not be able to take compliments, right? To take on these feelings of guilt and shame so deeply and not giving myself grace to be human. I have to go back to childhood. I'm actually planning a workshop on attachment wounds with Angela Kanu coming up next month. But we're going to be walking through how attachment wounds impact us in adulthood. Because this is huge. If you had a caregiver who was absent, who was not emotionally present, who may have been abusive, those create attachment wounds at such an early age, and they show up in adulthood. They show up in us being, having anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, dismissive attachment, even pushing away things that we actually want, connections that we actually want, because those wounds were made so early on. So that's key, going back to childhood. And again, this takes time, right? So give yourself grace, give yourself patience. This is heavy work. Those traumatic events that we experience in childhood are not to be done like, it's not a race. It's not a race to get there. You're not on a timetable. This is a lifelong process of understanding how childhood trauma has impacted us, bringing our awareness to that, maybe, making behavior changes, seeking out therapy. All of these things take time. They take mind space. A lot of the systems that we live in, they don't allow us time and space to reflect on how we've been traumatized, because they continue to traumatize us as adults by putting us in these inhuman systems. So that's real. I always want to make space for that. Yes. Yeah. Yes. It's real. It's real. Yeah. 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 And the majority of our brain development, again, occurs in childhood. So if you experienced all these traumatic events in childhood, and now you're just expected to flip the switch when you become an adult and not be affected by anything that you've experienced over the course of your life. No, that's not how that works. And that's why it's so pivotal to connect who we were as children to who we are as adults, because we're the same person. And it's just living in the society where we're taught to kind of disconnect that, to sever who we were as children from us as adults. Well, hold on. The majority of our brain development occurred during those years. So I have to go back and revisit that because I'm the same person. I'm just older. But I have all the memories. I have all the experiences. I have all the things that I went through. I still carry those with me and they show up. So that's why it's very important to reconnect to our childhood selves. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So some long-term negative effects of dissociation, right? So while dissociation can initially be a coping strategy, again, as a way to survive a traumatic environment in childhood that we could not escape, it allows a person to manage severe stress and personal threats. Again, when you don't have agency to leave, problems can occur when dissociation occurs in situations where the real danger is not present. So I have had to bring my awareness to this lately and realizing that I'm still operating in a trauma response, even when the environment I'm in does not require it. And what is that doing to my body, right? I'm still having the same level of hypervigilance that I had when I was in this traumatic environment, in an environment that now is actually safe and supportive, but the message hasn't come to my body that I don't have to operate that way anymore. So the more that we can tap in to our bodies, come back into our bodies, self-regulate, take that power back for ourselves, right? Through things like breathing, deep breathing, centering, meditation, right? Just 5 minutes of meditation a day. And I need to take my own advice because I've been off it for a second. Can really make a huge difference in just coming back into your body, recentering, grounding, right? Grounding techniques, whatever that looks like for you, coming back into your body. Because we want you in your body. We want you in your body. A lot of the times when we float up to our minds, that's when we go down the rabbit holes. The more that we can stay centered in our breath, breathe through it, recognize that we're being triggered, recognize that, ooh, I may be in a trauma response. I may be in my, I know for me, I may be in my flight trauma response, trying to get away from something that feels like a little too deep, right? Coming back into my body. How can I regulate myself in this moment? Because I have everything that it takes to regulate myself. And if I need tools, education is out there. What are some grounding techniques that may work for me? And again, this is a process, right? Like for me, I said this is a grounding technique for me, pinching right here. When I'm feeling myself become activated. Again, tapping into my body. My heart's starting to race. I'm starting to breathe a little bit heavier, right? Coming to that awareness. My palms are starting to sweat. I'm starting to go back into, my mind's starting to go back into the traumatic environment that I left. Grounding yourself. I'm not there anymore. I'm not there anymore. So if you can come to that realization, that's huge. And congratulate yourself, because that's huge, getting to that level of awareness that you are being activated. And that it's stemming from something that you experienced early on. You're not making this up. You're not making this up. We can tend to fall into a pattern of self-gaslighting too, right? If we're not in the environment anymore, you can be like, okay, why am I acting like this? There's nothing really going on. Well, your body knows. Your body knows. So something in your environment may be triggering memories of something that felt familiar before that was traumatizing to you. Right? So there's no need to self-gaslight. It's just really bringing awareness into this is happening, this is real, and I have the power to self-regulate. I have the power to breathe. At any point, I have the power. Yes. Yeah. Okay, y'all. So coping with dissociation, right? Just really taking care of yourself, seeking out therapy has been key for me. Seeking out education on things like childhood trauma, which I hope to bring more of. Again, I'm planning a workshop for next month on attachment wounds and how that shows up in adulthood. But really taking care of yourself, really journaling, really reflecting. So voice notes has been powerful for me. Again, bringing your awareness to how you operate in everyday life. So many of us just kind of, because of the systems we live in, we don't have that time and space to reflect on how we're operating. We're just going through the motions every day. But the more that you can bring your awareness to when this happens, when I'm interacting with this person, when I'm in this type of environment, this is how my body responds. I start to get nervous, right? Being in a toxic work environment. There was a certain meeting that I had to attend every other week. And every time I attended that meeting, I would become activated. And it wasn't until going to therapy and her being like, reflecting that back to me, like, when you go into that meeting every time you're experiencing the same symptoms, that may be stemming, or that may be like connected to something in childhood, something traumatic that you experienced before, your body remembers. So we're not making these things up, right? These are real memories. And like Ange B said, generational trauma. So epigenetics is the study of how trauma is passed through our DNA. So we're carrying trauma with us that our ancestors experienced. The level of trauma, I don't think there are words for, right? Being stripped from your land, being taken against your will, that lives within us. So a lot of these things that are triggering, they may even be generations back that our bodies are remembering. This environment doesn't feel safe to me. That's key. That's key. Oh, yay. I'm glad. I'm so glad you found it too. I'm glad you're here. Yes, yes. Okay, y'all. Just looking through my notes here. So another thing I'll just touch on quickly is memory loss. So if you did have to dissociate, again, to kind of take yourself out of your body, if something was very traumatic for you, you may experience memory loss. You may not even be able to remember what happened during that time or even the time after, right? There may be periods of your childhood that are just like blank in your mind. And that is a consequence of having to dissociate from whatever environment you were in. So if you are experiencing this, you're not alone. That happens to me too, right? Not being able to recall years, swaths of my childhood because I had to dissociate to survive. So yes, if you are experiencing memory loss, that may be a symptom of dissociation. Yeah, so memory loss that may involve people, places, or events. The feeling of being physically detached from the body, as if you're watching a movie of yourself. Emotional detachment, lack of sense of self. Some consequences can be relationship struggles, loss of jobs, anxiety, depression, and thoughts of self-harm. Right? So this is real. Jay says, yes, I have gaps in my memory from my childhood. Yes, me too. Me too. Yeah. There will be things I have tried to recall Someone may be like, oh, do you remember when that happened? It even happens to me now. I still experience that. Because again, trauma changes our brains. Trauma changes the ways that our brains develop, even into adulthood, right? So I still have memory loss when it comes to things that I experience now. I won't even be able to remember something that happened like a year ago. So that's real. That's real. It changes the makeup of our brains. And I think I did have some notes about that too. Let's see. Yes. Brain changes in trauma and dissociation. So the link between trauma and dissociation is further supported by studies looking at changes in brain function associated with trauma or dissociation. So it can be decreased limbic activity, increased frontal lobe activity, and changes in communication between these two regions. So that's real. The impact of trauma on the brain. And this is actually like a relatively new, studies are relatively new in this area, but how trauma impacts our brains. And I just think about our ancestors, right? Again, being stripped from your homeland, taken across an entire ocean in conditions that don't have words, inhumane conditions. How did this affect their brain development? How are we experiencing this today as the descendants, knowing that trauma lives in our DNA, right? So that's real. Jay says, yes, and I've often lived in my head, which is why I think I enjoy movement so much. Yeah. The sore muscles of stretching in my body. Yes. I have also lived in my head for so long. So anytime that you can bring in, gentle movement, that's key. That's key. Just reconnecting to your body. What movement activities bring you joy? Right? Is it dancing, stretching, yoga, walking? It doesn't have to be strenuous. That's another thing we're taught about exercise in the society. It has to be strenuous. We're competing. We're competing with ourselves. We're competing with other people. It can be gentle movement, anything that brings you back into your body. That's always the key. What brings me back into my body? Because I know I had to live in my head for so long. But now as an adult, I have the agency to come back into my body and breathe deeply and exit environments that are toxic. Now I have the ability and agency to do that. And again, I'll be talking with Dr. Kimani on Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern about how childhood trauma primes us for toxic jobs, right? And we feel like we can't exit these toxic jobs as adults in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, right? We still feel like we can't exit them. And how might that be rooted in childhood trauma where we couldn't exit our environments? That was real. And may our brains be operating in that same pattern of feeling like we're trapped, even if we do have freedom to move. How has trauma impacted our brains and primed us to enter and stay in environments that are extremely toxic to our well-being? Yeah, y'all. So I think that was all my notes. Again, I'll link the other article I was reading in the description section if you want to check it out. But yeah, I've enjoyed this conversation with y'all. And again, look out for my upcoming workshop with Angela Canu. We'll be doing a workshop on healing from attachment wounds in childhood next month in January. So I should be announcing that soon. But yeah, I thank y'all so much for sharing everything in the chat, all your experiences, all your comments, suggestions. I appreciate it. Yeah, Marissa, I used to love to swim. Me too. I love swimming. I'm an Aquarius too, so I feel like I'm like a water baby. Yes. Yeah. And the thing is, you can pick these things back up in adulthood. That's like the beauty of being an adult. You can, make your own decisions. You can go where you want to go. And because our brains are, still functioning in that survival state that we had to take on as children to get through, to survive. A lot of us don't even realize, right, the freedom that we have in adulthood now. So yeah, you can pick those things that brought you joy, those activities, those gifts that you put down. You can pick them back up. You can pick them back up. Angie says, yes, I have really gotten into researching epigenetics. Yeah, me too. Me too. Yeah. And that's an emerging field too, right? Realizing how trauma is passed through DNA. It's passed from, our ancestors, the people who came before us, and we still carry that in our bodies, in our genes. Yeah, that's real. Asada 5049, thank you. I'm glad I'm not alone. You're not. You're not. You're not. And I always hope to put that message forward. You're not alone, because I'm dealing with these same things right now. Even as I am educating to healing, I am also researching and sharing what I'm learning as I'm on my own healing journey and understanding why I was in a toxic job that I felt like I couldn't leave, right? And just sharing that information because it impacts so many of us. And this is relatively new to even be able to talk about this so openly. And I recognize that too. Yep. So thank you for being here, Sada 5049. Yeah, Vera says, I'm living in my head. Also, this is how I develop limerence. Ooh, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, limerence is having an unhealthy attachment to someone who is emotionally unavailable, kind of like obsessive thoughts and stuff like that. So thank you for sharing that. And I can see how living in your head can kind of lead to that, which I hadn't thought about before. So thank you. Yeah. Yes. Can dissociation be triggered by different various forms of trauma? Absolutely. Yeah, it doesn't have to just be childhood trauma. Any traumatic event that you experience, your brain could have went into protective mode and led you to dissociate, right? So it's just like an out-of-body experience, pulling you back from your body because your physical presence you're in a traumatic environment. So your brain's going into protective mode to protect your psyche from the trauma. But a lot of times, again, that leads to those impacts and negative consequences that we see when we're still operating in that survival mode after we've exited that traumatic environment. So yeah, doesn't just have to be childhood trauma. Yeah. Okay, y'all. I thank you for your feedback, your comments, all of that, and I hope that this was helpful. Again, I'll be chatting with Dr. Kimani of Lifting as We Climb Consulting on YouTube. We'll be chatting about how childhood trauma primes us to enter and stay in toxic jobs. So on Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern. So I'm excited for that conversation. And until then, I hope y'all have a beautiful rest of your day. And I'll chat with you soon. Bye.